right? One of the weakest killers in the game. Like, he's my bottom 3, Ghostface. Like, he's just a weaker Wraith. Wraith has, like, so much better stuff than him.
So you don't have a killer that's very, that can be very mediocre, that doesn't have many strong nuclear options. That's how I would feel about him.
Alright, so I'm seeing a lot of tier lists going around lately, and everyone seems to place Ghostie at a really low spot. And I'm telling you right now that he is way better than what people place him as, and is pretty underrated in general. I see a lot of people say that he's weak against people who just pay attention, but in reality, the situation is usually in your favor in single 1v1 encounters, so you should actually be able to sneak up on most people, unless the gen is like super open. And you should also be stalking them like completely unseen as well, and it's completely possible to do that. In fact, there are many areas that are just uncounterable against a good Ghostface who actually knows how to stalk while being hidden, and there's not much a good player can do to avoid getting downed in those situations. Unless the gen's like really wide open, in which case you can use it as killer to your advantage in other ways. Like, you can 99 the people over there and set up for a snowball later on. But overall, what you want to do to actually win almost every game is have a plan of when you're going to snowball and how you're going to do it. And that way, you can try to get someone to skip a phase on the hook and then get them killed quickly so you can make the game a lot easier for yourself later. Snowballing as Ghostie is different from like Oni or Plague snowballing. You want to get someone hooked and then silently pick off rescuers while also keeping an eye on the gens in order to get that person to skip a phase on the hook. It's not something you can just do or force, but I'll probably make a guide in the future on baiting. There's also a lot of strats you can use to get you to that specific point. And I'm also working on strats which let you 4K when all the gens are done, when there's at most 3 people remaining, which is something you can't do with any other killer against good survivors. But yeah, there's a much greater variety of strats you can do with this killer that actually like have big impacts on the outcome of the match. And people just don't really know about like most of them. Now I know what you're thinking. Sure, there's lots of things you can do with this killer, but how does that actually make it better than other killers? So I quickly put together Atsa's killer tier list, and I can safely say that Ghostie is better than like all of these other killers, except for maybe Twins. So what makes all these killers like worse than Ghostface is that they're all what I call race killers. Like, they can only actually chase one survivor at a time, generally, and they're just racing against the gens basically. Like, they have to get as many hooks as they can before the survivors finish all the gens, which, if it's like a very high skill game, they inevitably will. But with Ghostface, you can actually put pressure on multiple players at a time, whether it is through things like baiting or other methods, and you won't fall victim to the standard 1v1 chase routine that these other killers seem to have. His ability to target people and single them out is also pretty important. Like, you can actually get people out of the game fairly quickly, instead of most of these killers who are forced to chase after whoever's nearby. And more importantly, if there's someone like about to die, or who's dead on hook, they're gonna play like really safe and be a lot harder to find. But with Ghostface, even if they're hidden, you can basically force them to come out by putting pressure on the other survivors, in which case you can draw them out and kill them quickly. Even in situations where everyone's at 3 different gens, you can hook someone, then quietly down someone else at a gen, and then go after the 3rd person, so the 4th person has to go for the save, and in this way, all 4 people are not on gens. Whereas with any of these killers, you have to like start chasing. The 2nd person and the 3rd and 4th players will each be on separate gens. And also in terms of strats, there's a lot more you can do as Ghostie than with these other killers. And see, like, in my opinion, there's like a certain ceiling you can get to with these other killers that, like, once you're there, there's not really much you can do to improve, like, improve your performance against, like, good players, other than, like, tightening chases a bit. But with Ghostie, that's not really the case, where you can, like, come up with a new strat and completely change the course of the game. So this is what the list should look like, in my opinion. And yes, I don't think Pyramid Head is better than Ghostie. I also forgot to mention that a lot of these other killers can be countered with just by holding W, and it'll really slow them down. Yes, he does have some counter perks and bad maps, but he doesn't actually have like that many bad maps. It's only like a few Cold Wind and Auto Haven maps, and even then, they have like specific features you can learn to exploit and play around in different ways. For instance, corn maps gives you more hiding areas and gives you more opportunities to do things like baits or those kind of intercepting plays, and Auto Haven maps are pretty open, which lets you farm 99s off hooks more easily. The perks can also be played around pretty well by a good Ghostface player, and they only really become a problem when there's like 3 or 4 of the same perk. Like, you can play around 2 Spine Chills or 2 Sprint Bursts pretty easily if you're a good player. For instance, running things like Discordance, which is already a pretty good perk on its own, will help you figure out whether or not some people have Spine Chill. And you can then play around it if you think they do, instead of having to play around it every time you approach someone. But yeah, you should try to avoid those types of gens. And there aren't many gens like that, but you should learn to recognize which areas you can down people reasonably quickly. And pay attention to nearby loops before you actually go to down someone. But yeah, the point is, there's always something you can be doing better. And if you're chasing, it's your fault, not the killer's. There are specific survivor counter strats, but these aren't really well known yet, and I'm sure I'll figure out ways to counter them once they become more common. And stretch res is a bit of an issue, to be honest, but I don't think a lot of people actually run it, and I'm still kind of learning about what can be seen with and without stretch res, so I'll try to keep you posted on that. Don't get me wrong, it still needs to get fixed, but it's not as prevalent of an issue as most people think, in my opinion. I'm not saying I'm like entirely perfect either. I still like make a lot of mistakes, but at least I know there's something I could have done better, and that's the point. With other killers, I probably would have stopped learning new things ages ago, but you can keep doing things and keep getting better with Ghostie, is what I'm trying to say. I probably rambled for a bit too long, but yeah. And yes, he's a very difficult killer to master, but difficulty does not equal the potential for winning, so just get good.